So I'll start because I talk a lot and have a lot to say, and I don't always have room for questions and answers. Um, Maybe I'll give it a minute. I see some people connecting to audio still.
Well, I want to just congratulate you on the Erin Winborn Award for this year from the Drupal Association.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a really big honor. It's an award that I think it's the Drupal Community Working Group
Yeah.
bestows every year in honor of Erin Winborn, and I'm just really happy to see that you received that award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's a kind of weird because I work in the community. I get paid for it a little bit, and then I do a lot on my own time. And it's weird to like have people commend you on something you love to do anyway. You know what I mean? It's like it's like, thanks, this is what I love to do. But yeah, but thank you, Carol. That's really nice. I'll show it. It's made out of leather.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pressed leather, like leather belts all pressed together and dyed different colors to make it look like wood grain. Bo Shipley made it. He's another member of our community who I had the pleasure of meeting, which is always kind of nice that I knew someone who made me the award. But yeah, it's a really neat thing. Okay, I got a little flustered. Thanks, Carol. So I'll start now. Your accessibility is a moving target, and I want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping that Stanford is welcoming enough to provide a Zoom room that has captioning. So there's a little CC button in your toolbar that you can click and you can open up live captioning. So I'm not going to put on captions because it's already available. There are images in this presentation, mostly for decoration. So I'll describe any images for those that can't see if they have any important content or content relevant to what I'm talking about. But for the most part, most of my images are decorative. I live in California. I am in Hollister, California, but I am on traditional Ohlone land. So I like to acknowledge that at the beginning of my talks, just to let folks know where I am in our Americas. And my name is Amy June. I am the community ambassador and QA engineer over at Canopy Studios. We're located in the Bay Area along with Stanford. I help organize a couple of accessibility events. I help with core contributions in the Drupal world. I do work in the WordPress space, but not as much. And I'm a member of the community health team, CWG community health team. And I did mention before some of you join that I do talk a lot, and sometimes I don't always leave room for questions and answers. It isn't on purpose, it's just my style. So you can either email me at amyjune@canopy.com, or you can reach me in like Drupal Slack or some of the other Slack spaces, or Twitter or LinkedIn as Volkswagen Chick. And then I'll have that at the end when I ask for questions and answers and don't have time, I'll have this information again. And I do work for Canopy. We're hiring Drupal tech leads and WordPress and some non-developer positions too. If you have a question about that, feel free to reach out to me for that too. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking a little bit about, of course, what accessibility is. I'm going to go over some terms and definitions. I'm not going to go over them explicitly because it takes time away from the other part of the presentation, but I am going to talk about some of the acronyms we might hear. What user agents are available, because accessibility for our digital assets do have to do with our user agents. I want to talk about the life cycle of a website, some brief ideas about how we design for accessibility. I want to talk about accessible content And then at the end, I have a list of free tools that people can use to help access or test the accessibility of their website. So first, we need to embrace accessibility. We need to be advocates before we can really be like, being an advocate is more important than knowing all of the stuff, I think, So to be an advocate, you have to understand what accessibility is. And today I'm going to talk about producing rich content and how it changes over time, and how we can make sure that our digital assets stay accessible over time. So why do we design for accessibility? And for those of you that were at my talk yesterday, this will be familiar. It's the law. We want to include a wider base for our products and services. In the United States, about 26% of people live with some form of disability, whether or not it be a permanent disability, a situational disability, or a temporary disability. So breaking that down a little bit more, that's 1 in 4 people, and roughly 65 million people. So think about when your website leaves 65 million people behind. And remember, as we get older, it seems like the font size gets smaller on the screen, but it doesn't. Our hearing deteriorates. And of course, with COVID and people sheltering in place, there's a lot more situational disabilities. We have our kids at home, we have distractions. We're sharing internet space, so our bandwidth isn't as high as it usually is. And then I always like to remind people that not every disability can be seen. There's dizziness, there's mental health disorders, there's the hearing and the vision impairments that a lot of us first think about, but there's also debilitating pain. And I also want to bring up the fact of who am I to talk about accessibility. I live with a hearing impairment that it's a recent impairment that I've got, so in the last 3 years, I've lost hearing out of one side of my head, along with about a quarter out of the other. I'm also a hospice nurse by trade. And so before I was in tech, I witnessed firsthand how people were frustrated trying to access digital information. And that's why I'm an advocate, is, not only, seeing it, but being with people and having the empathy of them not being able to access things as simple as their emails. And then of course, accessibility means that you can readily access whatever, people can readily access whatever you're offering. And, when we talk about ADA, we think about services and venues, but we also have to think about our websites and even our written content, making sure that our written content is accessible. And inclusion does not mean giving people special privileges. It means making sure that those barriers are gone or reduced. We like to say that to remove them all. We want to think about, like, let's bring up an example. If getting up on stage, lots of times there's stairs. So you're leaving some people that can't navigate those stairs behind. But if you design in a way to accommodate everybody by having a ramp, that's not even an issue anymore. So it's a little bit about like switching the context a little bit, not making sure that you include everyone versus those special privileges just for the few. And this is a great quote, and I like to find new quotes, and this is the second time I've used this because she looks so happy. She's in this tie-dye shirt, she's got this bright nail polish on, and she's really has a smile on her face. And I'll just read this. It's by Kate Bornstein. She's a playwright and an actor and a gender theorist. Let's stop tolerating or accepting differences as if we're so much better for not being different in the first place. Instead, let's celebrate difference, because in this world, it takes a lot of guts to be different. And it really comes down to celebrating that uniqueness that all of us have. So here's those terms and definitions. Like I said, I'm just going to kind of breeze through these, but I would do a disservice for folks who are completely new if I didn't mention them. There's a lot of acronyms out there. There's the ADA, which prohibits discrimination, or it stands for the American Disabilities Act. It prohibits discrimination and guarantees people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else to participate in mainstream American life, and it's an American policy. Section 508 requires federal agencies to develop, procure, maintain, and use information and communications technology that's accessible to people who live with disabilities. And even though it's a federal mandate for procurement, it's regardless of whether or not you work for the federal government. Bill C-81C is the Accessible Canada Act. It ensures a barrier-free Canada to Parliament. And then there's the W3C, which stands for World Wide Web Consortium, and it's an international community that develops open guidelines to ensure the quality and growth of the web. And then we also hear WCAG quite a bit, or WCAG, you can say it however you want, but that's WCAG. That's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And this is really a set of shared standards for people who need them for web content accessibility. And it's primarily intended for web accessibility evaluation tool developers, the people who make the tools, web authoring tool developers, web content developers, and again, really anybody who needs a set of standards for web accessibility. And I just want to mention this because it's on the slide. Accessibility, inclusion, and user experience are very different things. They complement each other, but they are different. So think about that when you develop for the web too. The more accessible your website is, the more inclusive it is, and the easier people the easier people can use your website. So user experience is directly tied to accessibility. So we have WCAG 2.0, and this is to be WCAG 2.0 compliant is to be ADA compliant. It's a collection of more than 40 guidelines that improve usability for those of different abilities, and they're based on 4 principles, and we'll see it as an acronym for POUR, and I'll go over these in a little bit. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivability means that the user can identify content and interface elements, interactive elements by means of the senses. So they might not be able to access it by one sense, but we need to make sure that they access it by some sense. Operable. Operability means that a user can successfully use controls, buttons, navigation, any of those necessary interactive elements. And then understandable, we want to make sure that people can understand our content and they can learn and remember how to use the interface. And then robust, this has to do with our technology. Users should be able to choose the technology they use to interact with our websites, online documents, multimedia, and other informational formats. So any of our digital assets. And to simplify POUR just a little bit more, we just break it down to make sure that it's easy to hear, so we accommodate visual needs. Make sure people are able to interact with it, so we accommodate motor needs. Some people are unable to operate a mouse. Therefore, multimedia content should be delivered in a way that can be operated with the keyboard alone, maybe. We need to make sure that the controls are labeled and they're announced if folks are using screen readers. And then we need to make sure that folks can effectively interact with it if they are only using speech input devices, so we accommodate everyone's motor needs. Auditory needs, some people are unable to hear audio. So we need to make sure that we include things like transcripts and videos having closed captions. So we want to make sure that it's easy to hear, so we accommodate auditory needs. And then the last one, make it easy to understand. You want to take these 4 principles and make the experience as equivalent as possible across all of your websites and digital assets, regardless of things you can't control, like browsers and operating systems, being outside and having the sun glaring, and not being able to see your screen. So there's all different things to take into account when you think of these 4 principles. Okay, so that was WCAG 2.0 that we talked about before. Now WCAG 2.1, this is everything that 2.2 had to offer, but it added 17 new items. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I have a couple listed on the slide: line height, orientation, color contrast, all different sorts of things. And then to break down all these different levels even more, there's 3 levels. There's the A, the AA, and the AAA, and each increasing A indicates additional criteria to follow. So we have our level A, and this is really about complying minimally. If your digital assets don't meet this level, it means that people who live with disabilities are having a really hard time interacting with your website and assets. AA indicates a compliance level that is acceptable. That means that your website is usable and understandable by a majority of people. And the acceptable level these days across most of our agencies is WCAG 2.0 AA, just to put it in a little bit of a better frame. And then there's AAA. This is that optimal compliance. Not a whole lot of websites make this compliance level. And it has to do with being able to accommodate the maximum number of users with or without disabilities. It indicates that highest level of usability. Like I said before, to have a more accessible website makes your website more usable by everybody. So, the idea of this talk is to talk about what's next and what's coming up and what's in the future. So what's on the horizon. 2.2 was initiated with the goal to continue the work of 2.1, and it really improves accessibility guidance for 3 major groups. And these groups are users with cognitive or learning disabilities, users with low vision, and users with disabilities on mobile devices. So I'll say that again. Moving forward, we're thinking more about cognitive or learning disabilities, users with low vision, and users with disabilities on mobile devices. And it's everything that 2.1 had, plus 9 new items. And I'm not going to go into the individual new guidelines because I really want to stress that no matter what guidelines are on the horizon and are coming up, it's our responsibility as web designers and content authors and web developers and anyone who cares about digital accessibility to keep track and know about them, to have ways to find out what's coming up. And even though these criteria are still in draft forms, they were ideas that were important enough for someone to list them. And even if they don't get into guidelines, remember that they were important to someone. The Accessibility Guidelines Working Group recommends that sites adopt 2.2 as their next conformance target. Even if formal obligations mention previous versions, it's going to be a best practice to provide the improved accessibility and anticipate future policy changes. So again, anticipating your needs before they come up. And 3.0 is actually on the horizon. This specification presents a completely new model and set of guidelines to make, well, not completely new, but it frames things in a different way to make our web content and applications and assets accessible. They support a wider set of user needs. They talk about new approaches to testing. They allow frequent maintenance of guidelines and related content to keep pace with the technology as it comes up. Because as we know, technology is always changing. And 3.0 supports the evolution by focusing more on users' needs and improves the accessibility of products on a variety of platforms. So what 2.2 and 3.0 are doing, they're kinds of changes. It changes the way we think about these guidelines. They're taking into account more disabilities, thinking about cognitive disabilities moving forward. And that's not something that wasn't always considered. We want to be able to apply more technologies than just the web with these guidelines, things like virtual reality, augmented reality, voice assistants, things like that. And we want to consider all of the technologies that people use, including our web authoring tools, browsers, and media players. And this is important, because in theory, if 1 in 4 of us live with a disability, 1 in 4 of us employed on a web team live with a disability and can really utilize making sure that our admin interfaces are accessible too. So not only the front end users, but the back end users building the tools as well. So it really comes down to that accessibility is not static, it's dynamic, and it's never really done. It's always changing, and we need good sources of information to keep in our tool belts. You can do this by attending conferences, attending online meetups, subscribing to newsletters, doing your research and finding the credible sources of information and adding them to your weekly or monthly or daily reading habits. I put a few up here on the screen because this is the first source of information that I usually go to. W3C has a blog and they have a Twitter account, and then WAI at W3C has a really good Twitter account. And just this morning, I noticed that there's new stuff on the horizons as far as how to design for cognitive disabilities as well. So, you know, I learned something this morning. Uh-oh, I have to reload maybe. Okay, well, I just gave a screenshot of this of the new guideline that, or the new set of standards that came out this morning through the WAI at W3C schools. So moving forward, you know, we talked about that robust part of POUR, and that really talks about user agents. So what are user agents? You know, this is assistive technology. Sometimes we'll see the acronym AT. It's any device, software or equipment that helps people work around challenges that they have in learning and communicating and functioning on the web. So I know a lot of us are familiar with screen readers. They're used to listen to the content of the web page. They convert text to speech. We should also keep in mind, though, that screen readers can be used along with visuals on the web page for folks who have cognitive challenges. So we're not, screen readers aren't only used by the blind. So I have a list of some alternative input devices. An alternative to the typical mouse and keyboard interaction for users with physical or cognitive impairment. And some include head pointers, motion tracking and eye tracking, single switch entry devices, large print and tactile keyboards, large input software. And the picture up there is a refreshable braille display as the information is translated through the screen reader. It goes through the refreshable braille and raises and lowers the braille so people can understand if they're like maybe are blind deaf. Screen magnification software, you know, I don't know if it's just me, but websites are getting smaller and smaller, and the fonts, you know, I keep having to hit Command plus all the time. So screen magnification is very true to its name. It's used to enlarge the screen content. It's easier for us to read, especially if you live with a partial sight impairment. It's used by people with I'm sorry, I got distracted. Screen magnifiers also have text-to-speech functionality as well. And then I have a list of more assistive technologies and adaptive strategies that some people might not think about, but once you have awareness of these, it makes it easier to design your website thinking about all of these user agents. There's eye tracking, which is sometimes called eye gaze. It's a system that monitors eye movement to control the mouse pointer, and it can detect blinking to initiate mouse clicks. There are accelerators. This is software and functionality that help reduce the efforts needed to type or click. Custom keyboard customization. A lot of us use this in web development just because it's faster. It includes, you know, changing the mapping of your keys, assigning shortcut keys or sticky keys to support single hand typing sometimes. Some of us disable pop-ups and animations. Web browser plugins and other software, you know, can stop automated pop-up windows and redirections, and they also can add the option to stop, pause, and hide animations as well. We have refreshable braille displays. I showed an image of that on the last slide. It's that mechanical terminal that displays braille characters, and it raises and lowers the dots dynamically as the text is being read. There's all different kinds of reading assistants that change the presentation of content and provides other functionality to make it more readable. And this can be things like customizing the font size or a color, size and spacing, scanning the text for complex words and linking to glossaries and tooltips. Sometimes reading assistants can hide less relevant parts of the content, such as sidebars and headers, to keep focus. And then some of them will read the content aloud and highlight the text as it's being read. And then there's page maps, which displays, a small image of the entire web page and usually highlights the portion of the web page that's currently being viewed. So those are all different forms of assistive technology. So let's look at how some folks might use assistive technology. There are so many combinations of browsers and devices and ways to access information that you just need to be creative. And remember that empathy goes a long way here. Blindfold yourself, hide your mouse, turn your contrast really low. So I'm going to roll the dice with a couple scenarios. I'm at home and I'm babysitting and someone has walked away with my mouse. So I only have access to the keyboard. And I want to purchase a concert ticket. So there's time limits involved. So I have to make sure that I can navigate this concert ticket website to be able to perform the activity I need before the 5 minutes is up and my tickets go to somebody else. Okay, I live in Northern California. I take the Caltrain up to the Bay Area when I need to. I'm on my cell phone, because I can't carry my laptop around, when I'm waiting on the platform. So because I'm on my cell phone, I need websites to be responsive and not limit my screen orientation. I need to be able to scroll with only one bar. I don't want to have multiple scroll bars, horizontal and vertical. It makes it really hard to navigate. The train is really packed. I want to watch my favorite show, but I can't reach my headphones that are in my backpack. So I want to utilize captioning to fully understand what is happening on the screen. And then remember, it's the Bay Area, so it's foggy and it's probably raining. And I probably had too much coffee and I'm a bit shaky and I've dropped my phone. That touch target on the screen needs to be large enough for me to activate without that crack getting in the way. Now, I'm using these scenarios for me being temporary situations, but think about how people who live with permanent disabilities access the same stuff the same way. They could have, Huntington's disease or Parkinson's, so they have a palsy in their handshakes. All different kinds of things to think about. So like I said, just kind of think about all the different ways people can utilize these user agents. So I want to go and talk about the life cycle of a website and what we can do to improve accessibility during the life cycle. But first, I want to pause and talk about how all of our communities need to stand up against racism. Like Asian American Pacific Islander racism in our Bay Area. Violence against this group of people is really raised during the pandemic. So I want to invite folks to check out the hashtag on Twitter or go to their website and find out more information about how you can help. And that hashtag I have up there is Stop AAPI Hate. And the website is stopaapihate.org. So thank you for listening. So what's the typical life cycle of a website? We all do it a little bit differently, but we draw up wireframes and we do research while getting stakeholder input. Then the research gets passed to the user experience and design team. The developers will get involved and the QA person may be adding placeholder content, because it's hard to test whether or not your site has full functionality if you don't have content. There's a stakeholder handoff at that point, and the site is sort of popped out on that other side, leaving the content creators and editors to finish off the site before launch. So let's talk about the roles and responsibilities of all of those people during the life cycle of our website. Because all of these people have tasks. And usually they're assigned with their roles, the designers, front-end developers, back-end developers, our QA people, product owners, and editors. We need to make sure that we're giving our roles accessibility responsibilities across the whole team. That means having cross-functional teams. I attended a session at AxCon with Glenda Sims from DeQ. She said that 2/3 of issues that DeQ found on their website could have been resolved at the design phase. So that's one of those first phases that we looked at that last slide. So let's extrapolate a little bit. If we don't have, if we're not watching for them in the design phase, these errors are moved through all of the different levels, and they could have been resolved first. So if accessibility discussion starts with the wireframes, and the developers and the designers weigh in at the same time, there's not much to fix before stakeholder handoff. So the idea is that we really need to empower our designers and the people doing the research to imagine, or just have accessibility in their mind from the beginning. Fixing an issue in production is so much more complicated than fixing it in the design phase. And then we also want to think about our editors and our content creators, empowering our content authors and setting them up for success. We train our developers and we train our designers for accessibility. And we'd be really doing a disservice if we didn't train our content authors at the same time, because if we think about it, our content authors and creators are in the website after handoff every day, day to day, hour to hour, adding content. So I want to reimagine that life cycle of a build and start with, the wireframes. Here's that linear format, but let's inject testing at the wireframe and the research level, and then test our designs as they go from sketch to user experience, for usability, and then test and audit in the development phase while placeholder content is added. Because when we test for accessibility at all phases of development, or better yet, we bake that accessibility into our website from the beginning, it really alleviates a lot of those headaches we experience later on. QA should happen at all phases of the website, but even better, accessibility should be baked in from the beginning. So let's reimagine the life cycle once more and take it from that linear trajectory into a circular. This process can be called, or it might be a form of continuous website improvement. We need to remember that accessibility is never done. We want to make sure that we strategize and develop in a style that allows flexible changes as the guidelines evolve. And I'm going to say that again because it's really important. We want to develop in a style that allows flexible changes as guidelines evolve, because we know that guidelines change over time. We want to make sure our solutions have impact, that we create and implement best practices, and we do it iteratively again at each phase of the website. And we want to learn as we iterate. We want to understand what works through the cycle and what doesn't. We want to have retrospectives with the team. And that means the whole team, even though they're not involved with the process, because when we include the whole team, we have a more dynamic idea of what's happening. We get input from each person in each phase of the development process. Do you have accessibility reviews and audits? It's just like going uphill on a 36 horsepower Volkswagen Bug. Once you get started, the momentum keeps you going, so you're learning and iterating. So continuous website improvement can be really challenging at first, but once you get that wheel spinning, you gain traction and momentum. So how do we design for accessibility? Designing and content creation are similar, but they happen at different times of the website's life. Design is more, happens before launch, and content can happen at all phases. We'll concentrate on content next, but talking about design, for better readability, we want to make sure that we utilize visual and semantic space. Space is an important part of visual design that helps us identify groups of related content and delineate it from unrelated content. We want to provide the right amount of space between lines of text. You know, for most content work, the interline spacing is already applied automatically, but make sure that it's good from the start. We want to make sure we use clean typography, avoid changing typeface from that specified by the website, and making sure that it's consistent across all pages. Avoid using all capital letters. Readability is really reduced when our content is all in capital letters, because all words have a uniform rectangular shape at that point. And some people rely on identifying words by their shape. We don't want to underline text. We want to reserve that for underlining for identifying links. And most of us know, or who have been on the web for a while, that if we see an underline on a web page, we assume it's going to be a link. So please just reserve that for links. Use left align text. You know, a consistent left margin makes reading really easy. Don't put 2 spaces after a period. This is left over from our typefacing days. And we want to make sure that we support text resizing. You know, that way people who hit that command plus, or however it works on Windows, that our content responds to enlarged text and doesn't get all warbly and stuff. So now let's talk about accessible content. You know, your code is accessible, your designs are accessible, but really the most of our changes that happen in our website over time have to do with entering content. This is one of those moving targets, especially when a team of people who, the people who are involved might have access to a WYSIWYG, you know, an editor that has a whole bunch of bells and whistles. But fortunately, this is something that's more straightforward to remedy, and accessible content can be a really easy win. And remember, content is entered at every cycle of the life cycle of the site. So I recommend knowing your audience first. You know, fix your language to your audience and context. You know, stick to predetermined reading levels. Put information in logical order with important details first. I don't know if I mentioned this later. I forget sometimes what slides I put in, but it's recommended that you keep your reading level to the 9th grade reading level. Of course, there's exceptions to this because, you know, you've got like university websites and white papers and technical documentation, but readability.gov recommends that 9th grade reading level. Alt text, you know, their purpose is to describe images for people who don't see them. This is not only for screen readers, but for folks who have images turned off in their browsers. I live rurally, so it takes my internet a long time to load images, so sometimes I have those turned off. Familiar language, you know, use words and combinations of words that are familiar to your audience. You're striving to communicate with your readers, not impress them by using uncommon or showy words, you know, so choose language that people can relate to. So avoid buzzwords and jargon. Be consistent with the words that you use. If you refer to the same person or object several times, keep it by the same name. Be careful when you use symbols, because rare characters and certain types of punctuation aren't always familiar to everybody. Be really careful when you use acronyms and numerams. You know, provide a key for the first time that acronym is introduced. So think about like the sentence, when working with the National Health Service. So the first time I introduce that, I'll say National Health Services, and then I'll have NHS in parentheses, and then I can use NHS through the rest of the article. But you want to provide that key for context. And then remember, familiar language is easily searchable and will often gain you better SEO ranking, search engine optimization, because the words you use in your copy should reflect the words that people are using to search for your stuff. Plain language, language that is difficult to read can be a barrier for all users, but particularly for people who have cognitive disabilities, low reading literacy, and people who the content is about an unknown topic, or maybe it's even written in an unfamiliar language. So people with disabilities that affect the ability to access and read content, when you use plain language, it's easier for them to parse. And then, like I said, it really benefits people who use English as a second language. If your content is meant to appeal to a wider international audience, plain language is even more crucial. In general, keep your words, sentences, and paragraphs short. Break up your content with bullet points. Make sure you use consistent headings, and make sure you break up your information in a logical way. And I only have a few minutes left. So I want to talk about testing tools. These are tools that you can use to sort of evaluate your website on the fly. I'm only listing free tools because I know that economic barrier is a thing. So I just listed some free tools here. Screen reader, a screen reader is an essential piece of software for a blind or impaired user. If you have a Mac, you have Mac voiceover on your machine natively. Some people use JAWS, but you can get a free JAWS license, for a little while, or you can use NVDA. There's the Wave tool. This is a browser extension with a one-click functionality. You just click it and it'll evaluate your web page for you. It's a set of evaluation tools that help authors make their web content more accessible. And it has a really nice user interface with icons and different things. It's easy to use. Browser extensions that are in the inspector tool, there's the Axe tool. It's the accessibility engine. It's a compact library that uses JavaScript. It's open source and available on GitHub. Lighthouse is another browser extension. It's open source automated tool for improving the quality of web pages. It not only tests for accessibility, but will test for speed and performance and search engine optimization as well. And then your keyboard. We all have keyboards. We might not all use them, but we have to remember that all functionality must be usable with the keyboard. What that means is users can access and move between links, buttons, forms, any interactive elements. Websites should not require a mouse. For example, a pop-up calendar, you should be able to let your users type in a date, not just have to click with the mouse. There's the WebAIM contrast checker. This is a free website that helps to determine clarity and accuracy of the text and the contrast of visible elements on your page. And there's the Site Improve Accessibility Checker. This is a tool that provides a really intuitive visual feedback about your content by highlighting detected issues. It not only highlights errors, but it also highlights warnings and makes suggestions as to what could be manually tested. So if you're unfamiliar with how to use or how to audit a website, this is really handy because it gives the warnings and also gives you what to manually check for. Because remember, automated tools only catch 30 to 40% of the errors on your website because they only catch what they're designed to use. So not only use these automated tools, but make sure that you do the manual checking as well. The Ally Project Checklist, that's A11Y, that's a numerum for accessibility. This checklist uses the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as a reference point. And remember that WCAG is that shared standard for web accessibility for individuals, organizations, and governments. And I promise I only have a couple left. I know we're at time. So there's Zoom, 200%. We really do want to test our websites using this. Basically, Screen Magnifier, it's an application that increases the size of the text and graphics on your computer screen. And this is really enlightening because you can do zoom plus up to 200%, and it might change the way your website is oriented. It could go into mobile view. So this is something to be very cognizant about. It goes back to like rolling the dice with different combinations. So now that you've zoomed plus 200% and things are in accordions, can your keyboard navigate them? You know, so like I said, just play around with all of these different things. An important characteristic of an accessible page is making sure that it's free of syntax errors. So use some sort of CSS and HTML validation. And then there's a readability testing tool by WebFX. It takes the text on your screen and gives a score for most of the more used readability indicators. And then I have a link to tools, and I will share my slide deck. And much as what I said, I talk a lot and am at time. I don't see any questions in chat. But I want to remind folks that I am very accessible, like across social media, like Volkswagen Chick, and then Amy June at canopy.com is a really good place to reach out to me. LinkedIn is a good place. I'm always happy to share accessibility knowledge and resources with folks. Like if you have bare minimum knowledge and want to know how to get started, I can do that. If you're more expert and need advice on different things, I can help there too. I'm always happy to help people because I really do believe that an accessible web is an inclusive web. Yeah, so thank you. And I want to thank Stanford for having me. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I want to share the link to my slides. And find a place to do it.
If you want to, well, I'll put it in Slack in the chat and see if I can copy it out, and I can put it on your oops.
Did you get that?
Let's see if it'll let me copy it. Sometimes the chat window doesn't like me. Yeah, I think I got it.
Okay, great.
I'll put that on your page.
Okay. So thank you, Carol, one more time.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you come and speak at our camp.